I will call the meeting to order.
Love that gavel.
Best I could come up with for a gavel. The Senate Education Committee is called to order. Let me just adjust something here. As chair of the Senate Education Committee, and in accordance with the passage of House Concurrent Resolution 1, adopting rules of procedure for the General Assembly and its legislative committees during an emergency, this public body is authorized to meet virtually. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously. We are utilizing Zoom webinar for this virtual meeting. All members of this committee can communicate synchronously on this platform. Should any member experience technical difficulties, please call Anthony Bernard-Zakowski at, write this down, 484-283-5008. 484-283-5008. The public may participate by registering via the meeting link that is posted on the General Assembly's website. Should the public be unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Instructions for providing public comment are posted on the General Assembly's website under this committee meeting's notice and will be provided during the public comment portion of the meeting. Let's begin today's meeting by taking a roll call attendance of the committee members present. Committee members, please ensure that your cameras remain on, if possible, for the entirety of the meeting. When your name is called, please unmute your device and affirm your attendance. Once you've been recorded as present, please mute your device for the duration of the roll call. Senator Sokola.
Present.
Present. Senator Lockman.
Present.
Present. Senator Townsend. Absent. Senator Bonini.
Virtually present, thank you.
Virtually present. Senator Lopez. Absent. At this time, I would consider a motion to approve the minutes of our previous meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Minutes are approved. And now, without further ado, thank you all for being here today. Thank you to the members of the public who have joined us. I cannot think of a more important focus for the Senate Education Committee than early literacy and getting kids a strong foundation. Decades of research have shown that there truly is a science of how to teach reading, and that reading is the key to academic success in high school and beyond. And we want to be sure that this science is being implemented in Delaware schools and in Delaware teacher preparation programs. As a high school teacher, I saw students who did not have the foundation and struggled in every subject. Our kids deserve literacy education taught by teachers who know the science. Further, I'm passionate about ensuring teaching is a respected profession. We want to attract the best and brightest, hold them to the high bar our students deserve, and give them the support they deserve. Teaching reading in such a way as to get all children reading on level by the end of second grade is achievable. If we teach our students how to read the right way, we will be one step closer to education equity, narrowing learning gaps between high and low income students, between students of privilege and students at risk. Teaching reading the right way means fewer interventions needed to reteach and remediate. Teaching reading the right way means empowering kids from all backgrounds, taking away a source of shame and a cause for acting out or giving up. Teaching reading the right way will mean fewer young people in our prisons. The number of incarcerated offenders who are either illiterate or well below their reading level by age and school is staggering. One can draw a direct line from lack of reading skills to lack of opportunity to ending up in the criminal justice system. Intervening and fixing, but the science of reading gives us the opportunity to set students up for reading success from the start. Now that we are finally addressing trauma and mental health as it relates to academic outcomes, let us add this additional piece of the puzzle. Good readers make good, successful classroom citizens, neighbors, workers, and eventually job creators.
Yeah.
And now I want to give my co-hosts the opportunity to share some remarks. Representative Williams will then be followed by Senator McBride. Representative Williams is the chair of the House Education Committee.
Thank you, Senator Sturgeon and the Senate Education Committee members for hosting this panel discussion on early literacy. Thank you to the public for joining us. So reading and early intervention is the key to building a strong literacy foundation. Senator Sturgeon highlighted many points, and I'm happy that I'm working on this legislation with Senator Sturgeon and Senator McBride. We know that literacy is linked with high school graduation, better health outcomes, and even engagement with the criminal justice system, as Senator Sturgeon pointed out. In Delaware, only 29% of our prisoner population have a GED or high school degree, and many of them are not literate at a high school level. Prioritizing our literacy then is fundamental to the success of our children. I'm looking forward to learning more today. This is such a necessary and important conversation. I'd like to introduce Senator Sarah McBride, Chair of the Senate House and Social Services Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam House Chair and Madam Senate Chair. Thank you both for letting me join both your effort around science-based reading instruction and this wonderful conversation, and of course, the Senate Education Committee. I don't want to speak too long because we are incredibly lucky to have some brilliant national experts on this topic. But of course, over the last several years, our state has rightfully grappled with and sought a path forward early literacy efforts and making sure that every single one of our students is able to read at grade level from an early an age as possible. We know, as Senator Sturgeon mentioned, early literacy really is not just the foundation for academic success for our students. It's really the foundation for our students to be able to grow up and pursue their dreams, be active participants in our society, and really help to create a world that is better, more inclusive, and more productive. One of the things that I have learned over the last few months coming into the Delaware State Senate is Senator Sturgeon's incredible brilliance on this topic. And from an early point in my time in the Senate, Senator Sturgeon has been talking to me about the transformative impact that evidence-based and science-based reading instruction can have. In order for us to reach our full potential here in our state, we need an all-of-the-above approach when it comes to facilitating and fostering reading comprehension and reading skills among our students. And really at the heart of empowering our students when it comes to reading is empowering our educators with the full knowledge of the science and evidence behind reading curriculum. We have seen the transformative impact of this approach in the states that have adopted policies that empower educators with that information. Mississippi, for instance, reports some of the highest growth in reading levels among its students since it's adopted policies that empower their educators with evidence and science-based reading instruction. And so I'm thrilled to be able to learn more, to be able to listen today, and to be able to work with Senator Sturgeon and Representative Williams and so many of you as we try to enhance our state's reading comprehension and literacy in elementary school and beyond. So Senator Sturgeon, I'll turn it back over to you to start this great conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Kim, for your remarks. We're pleased to welcome 3 national experts on the science of reading and reading policy. I'll be introducing the first, and then Representative Williams and Senator McBride will introduce the other 2 after our first speaker gives her presentation. Our first speaker today is Laura Stewart, National Director of the Reading League. The Reading League is a national not-for-profit that promotes literacy education rooted in science. Laura has over 30 years of experience at Highlights for Children, a magazine that my mother subscribed to for me when I was a child, and the Roland Reading Foundation. She has served as a classroom teacher, building and district administrator, professor, and director of professional development. She is an author and national expert on the science of reading. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. It really is just such a delight to be here. Can you see my slide okay?
So I see you, but not a slide.
Okay, hold on
Hold on,
one
hold on.
second.
Now I'm starting.
Wait,
For a
hold
moment there, I
on.
did.
Okay, there we go. Hold on one second. Just excuse the technical difficulties.
No, that's good. Now we see the,
How's that?
yes, perfect.
All right, very good. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here. Just hearing all of you talk with such passion and commitment just really fires me up. And I'm really honored to be part of this panel. As Senator Sturgeon said, I'm Laura Stewart. I'm the National Director of the Reading League. And just to reiterate who we are and what we do, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned reading instruction in schools. I would say that we exist to solve a problem, and that problem is the large number of children who are not reaching proficient levels of reading today. I'll tell you a little bit more about our work toward the end of my brief time with you today. So this evidence-aligned reading instruction is often referred to as the science of reading. And I'm guessing that that's a phrase that many of you have heard a lot of, especially recently. You mentioned Emily Hanford, Senator Sturgeon, her American Public Media reports. I know those are on your reading list, and she has really, in my estimation, elevated the conversation for all of us. But what is the science of reading? So I wanted to share with you, we at the Reading League, we started a movement. We call it the Science of Reading, a Defining Movement. And we've worked with other partner organizations similar to ourselves to write up sort of an agreed upon definition of what the science of reading is. I'm going to pause here and just let you read this definition and the supporting statements on the screen here.
And I'd like to let everyone know I'm sorry to be interrupting your reading,
No, please.
but we are recording this, and we'll make this available on some social media platforms to be announced for future reference if people want to look back at this, and for people who are unable to join us today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So, when I share this with people, oftentimes, people are astounded that this research this base is over 40 years old, and it's interdisciplinary and it's vast. And in fact, reading is the most studied aspect of human learning. Now, with all of this, then you would imagine that our literacy rates would be very high in this country if we have this evidence base to guide our practice. But sadly, this information is rarely present in our schools of teacher preparation. I'll let you go ahead and read this to yourself as well. So all of these studies show that many of us were not exposed to the science of reading in our professional preparation. And because of that, there are misconceptions about reading and about the process of reading that have been guiding practice for decades. So I'd like to share with you kind of three what I call big ideas today. I'm calling them a misconception, a guiding light, and a promise. Those are the big ideas. So the first big idea is based on this misconception that reading is somehow a naturally occurring process. But indeed, we know it is not, and instruction really counts. The second big idea is this convergence of evidence. This is our guiding light. And the third most exciting idea is this promise. With research-based instruction, we can deliver on this promise of virtually literacy for all. So let's talk about this. Why is reading not natural? Well, I would refer to this wonderful book called Reader Come Home. It's about the reading brain in the digital age, which I know a lot of us are really interested in. Marianne Wolf has written extensively on this idea, and she says, human beings were never born to read. Yes, some children seem to effortlessly begin reading, but the majority of us really need to be taught. And part of it is when you just think about reading and writing as recent inventions in this kind of grand scope of humanity, right? So here's the present day, and spoken language is hardwired inside the brain. Our brain is fully adapted for language processing, but the written code hasn't been around long enough for humans to have developed a reading brain. So this neural circuitry that's necessary to read is created primarily through instruction. So if we know that instruction really counts, the question becomes, what does that instruction look like? So we think about, as teachers especially, what do we know about the process of learning to read? Because if we know about the process, we overlay instruction on that. And when I think about the process of reading, there's kind of two conceptual models that I want to share with you. The first is called the simple view of reading. was first posited in 1986. It's been supported by a strong, enduring body of evidence. And the simple view really presents this equation for reading comprehension. Essentially, that reading comprehension is a product of word recognition or decoding and language comprehension or listening comprehension. So to put it very simply, decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Now, an important note here, it's a product, it's not a sum. You know, we don't just teach kids to decode, then we add some language comprehension and, you know, reading. It's this interaction, it's this interplay of the two that allows us to both get the text off the page and think our way through that text to make sense of it. So the simple view is just a lovely baseline, big picture model because it represents the idea that both aspects of reading, decoding, and language are equally important of making sense of text. So simple view, or SVR, is our first kind of grounding conceptual model. The second is referred to as Hollis-Scarborough's rote model, and this helps us flesh out what we mean by decoding and language comprehension, because what it does is it breaks down those subskills of the simple view. I love the elegance of this model. I think it's a great metaphor for skilled reading. When we look at our language comprehension, that domain, it's made up of our background knowledge, our vocabulary, our understanding of language structures, such as the syntax of sentences. It includes verbal reasoning, allows us to infer or read between the lines, and then literacy knowledge, which is how print and books work, how text is organized. So you bring that to the table as a fluent, competent reader. The word recognition strand, the subskills are the phonological awareness, the sound system of our language. When we combine that sound system with print, it allows us to decode and spell. And ultimately, we want this process to result in this bank of words in our brain that are instantly retrievable as sight words. Now, what I love about this model, again, I mentioned I find it extremely elegant because it's just a really great metaphor. You see it over time that language comprehensions, those strands become increasingly strategic, and those word recognition strands became increasingly automatic. And that integration of the two represents the skilled reading. And the simple view connects to this. So decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Although this is kind of simple, it conveys some, I think, complex ideas. For example, look at the word recognition. It's a braid. And when you think about braiding, you know, we have to braid in a very deliberate, methodical, sequential way, which is just as we need to teach those foundational word recognition skills, right? The last kind of body of research I'm just going to overview really quickly today is this neuroscience, because this is extremely exciting. It's a vast and growing body of research. This obviously is a very simplified view of the main areas of the brain involved in reading, as identified by fMRI studies. And this is the left hemisphere, which is the hemisphere devoted to language, which is where we want to build those efficient reading systems. So when we think about what we see in the fMRI studies in the process of fluent reading, fluent competent reading, we see these areas that light up essentially. This orthographic processor processes print, this phonological processor processes sounds, and these brain imaging studies have enabled us to see this activation pattern that shows that proficient readers have created a neural pathway that makes a connection between those two areas. And that's the area that we want to develop so that we can quickly and efficiently and automatically come to link letters and sounds to read and spell. And again, it's important to remember this doesn't happen spontaneously. It doesn't happen naturally. You know, these neurons have always been there in the brain, but it's through that instruction that we are essentially repurposing them for reading. And for most of us, the majority of us, this system has to be built through explicit systematic instruction, because again, it's not natural. Systematic explicit instruction in sounds and letters and how they map together. So this neuroscientific, research has really revealed a very, what I consider, fundamental truth about reading instruction. And it's that there are not hundreds of ways to learn to read. When it comes to reading, we all have roughly the same brain that imposes the same constraints on the same learning sequence. And this is Stanislaus Dehaene, who is one of, if not the world's leading authority on the neuroscience of language. His book, Reading in the Brain, he also has one that's just called How We Learn. That's just fantastic. So understanding this process of learning to read and how instruction develops that process can yield results for all of our kids. All right, so that just in a few minutes gives you a bit of a taste for the essential underpinnings of the science of reading and the why behind the science of reading. Of course, the science of reading also yields information into what we teach. We call this the Big Five, the components of the science of reading, first identified by the National Reading Panel: phonologic and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, which is a goal of reading in addition to being one of the 5 essential elements. So, big idea number 3, the promise: we can deliver literacy for all of our kids. This is a quote from a 2011 publication by Louisa Moats. I'll let you go ahead and read this to yourself. So we really can teach at least 95% of our children to read with accuracy, understanding, and joy. And that is the promise we want to deliver on. I encourage you to get to know us, the Reading League. We offer many things. We have a journal that really bridges research to practice. We offer lots of live events. I'm privileged enough to have a podcast in which I talk to many of these heroes that I mentioned today: Marianne Wolf, Emily Hanford, Louisa Moats. We offer professional development to support teachers in service. We offer lots of free resources on our knowledge page, our YouTube channel, and we form chapters in states. I did get an inquiry from Delaware, so I'm hoping we can start a chapter in Delaware soon. Please follow us on social media. And here's my information. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. I believe you also have a link to a white paper I wrote that summarizes a lot of the information I shared with you today. So thank you for allowing me this time with you. It's just a privilege and a pleasure to share this information. And thank you for your interest and all you're doing for children and teachers in Delaware.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really informative. And I love the way you took some, pretty complex science and complex processes of the brain and explained them in a way that the layperson can understand. And it's
Thank
really,
you.
those metaphors, the rope, for example, really, really helpful.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, I'm going to quickly move along. Thank you again. And I'm going to ask Representative Williams to please introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Hi, everyone. Matthew Weyer, Education Policy Specialist at the National Conference of State Legislatures. Thank you, Laura. I'm pleased to introduce Matt from the Education Committee of the States. Matt has an early childhood and literacy policy experience at the National Conference of State Legislatures as a kindergarten teacher in a bilingual classroom in Colorado. We look forward to hearing from Matt about what other states have done to strengthen their literacy policies and how Delaware can learn from those experiences. You're up, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair Williams and Madam Chair Sturgeon, for the opportunity, and to all the committee members on the call today. ECS, Education Commission of the States, is excited to have the opportunity to share with you all our knowledge on the topic. So if we could pull up the slides, and apologies, I'm going to have Anthony advance them for me, just to avoid any kind of hiccups on the remote side of this. So we'll be talking, providing kind of a 50-state look at teacher prep and professional development as it relates to kindergarten through 3rd grade literacy. As Laura laid out, teachers are a very influential piece of the puzzle to developing early literacy. And I can say, for one, that as a kindergarten teacher, got very little training in specific literacy instruction, especially across languages as well. So just quickly, I'm a senior policy analyst at ECS. I spent some time, I've been at ECS for a couple of years, was at NCSL for 4.5 years before that, and have a doctorate in educational policy and leadership from the University of Denver. Next slide. Just quickly, if you don't know about Education Commission of the States, we're a national policy organization that focuses on all 50 states and has been in existence for nearly 60 years. We're a nonpartisan and unbiased organization that covers everything from early learning all the way through post-secondary workforce. Next slide. And we utilize our deep knowledge of research, best practices, and learning from other states to really help policymakers like yourselves find contextualized state-specific solutions to your problems. Next slide. We do this through 4 central pillars, research and reporting, as well as convening and counseling. So next slide. Just a quick kind of overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll be really quickly touching on some new K-1 literacy research that was released in February, just to kind of situate within the pandemic as well. But we'll spend the majority of my time unpacking the results of our K3 50-state comparison, which was just updated in September, and there's a link later on in the slide. And then just time dependent, we'll kind of quickly stack those categories up against where Delaware is with its policies in these areas. Next slide. So you can hold right there. So recent research from a group known as Amplify surveyed or collected research on over 400,000 K-5 students across 1,400 schools in 41 states. These were largely concentrated in urban areas, but does provide a pretty good look at what's happening across the country. And of those K-5 grades, found that losses were really concentrated in the kindergarten and first grade as it relates to the DIBELS assessment, which is really a measure of pre-literacy skills. So they found increases in students needing intensive intervention from 28 to 40%, 47% for kindergarten, and from 26% up to 43% in first grade. So really seeing a concentration of learning loss happening in these early grades. Next slide. And just quickly, that this is having a disproportionate effect on Black and Hispanic students compared to the white peers. And you can see across the bottom, this is in comparison to the 1920 school year. There's a lot of different explanations and reasons for this, but it's kind of beyond the total topic of today's scope, but you can see those increases in reading deficiencies across subgroup. And just to frame this is just one study. I just kind of want to present it. We all know the pandemic is taking a serious toll on students' learning, and that this issue is more important than it's ever been. And there's a link to that research there if you would like that. Next slide. So here's the link at the bottom for our 50-state comparison. There are 25 data points that we collected. I'll be just looking at 2. The first question asks, what are the requirements for pre-service qualifications and professional development for in-service educators? So we kind of found 3 major categories as it relates to preparation. The first is around coursework and competency, and I'll unpack each of these as we're looking at the maps of the states. The next main category was passing some type of assessment in the teacher prep program, and then a really strong uptick in statute addressing dyslexia as well. Next slide. So we found 33 states have statute, and I also should preface that too. All this is based on statute, so there may be a lot more happening on the ground that we're unaware of, but this is kind of what we capture at ECS from our national perspective. So 33 states have statute on teacher prep, and this includes a broad focus on early literacy development. So this isn't as targeted as what Laura was talking about with all the science of reading, the comprehension, the 5 pieces of literacy instruction. Only 9 of the states that are shown here have the specific elements that Laura presented on within their statute and elevate those. So we just wanted to highlight 2 quick state examples, those in red. Oregon has a Teacher Standards and Practices Commission that really tries to set a strong framework for ensuring that their teacher graduates have the skills to get kids to reading at grade level by 3rd grade, or if not before, to really align with all the policies that they have at the state level. In Tennessee, they just passed a bill in January. Actually, that was a focus of a special session, but this bill requires the state education agency to conduct a landscape analysis of the K-3 literacy instruction going on in the schools, but also within teacher prep programs. So it might be something to consider, and we can provide a link to that if it's needed. Next slide. So just transitioning, 7 states were located that require passing an assessment, and this is just a broad category. These are by no means recommendations for how or how not to do early literacy. So these types of assessments include things like integrating literacy into other subjects, supports for English learners, dual language learners. And of these 7, only Arkansas and Wisconsin's assessments specifically address in statute some of the things that Laura was talking about. So it doesn't mean that they're not, but that was just what was addressed in statute. We're elevating Idaho's assessment here. They have a comprehensive literacy assessment that contains 4 sections. The first is on the structure of language, the second on comprehension, the third on assessment, and the fourth is on writing processes and knowledge. And every candidate must pass all 4 sections at 70% or higher, and each section contains about 50 items. So it seems like a pretty rigorous assessment there. Next slide. And as I mentioned before, dyslexia is getting quite a bit of attention nationally as it accounts. The research kind of varies, and I'd be happy to hear others chime in here too. But from what I saw, about 5 to 15% of the general population may have some form of dyslexia. So it could be something to consider as part of this. 12 states have requirements as it relates to teacher preparation. If you click one more time, we just want to highlight Connecticut. They have quite a specific requirement for teacher prep there. In order to obtain an initial educator certificate, a candidate is required to complete a course of study in special education focused on young children, as well as a specific course to instruction on classroom techniques and teaching reading too. So they really try to provide supports that may be helpful in identifying and supporting students with dyslexia. Next slide. I think there's 3 clicks here. So now we're pivoting to professional development, so the in-service side of the equation. And these are kind of the 3 main categories we found, just the basic provision of professional development, kind of writ large. The second is around coaching and mentoring, which is an emerging area where we're seeing a little bit, but not quite as much as the first category, and then dyslexia again. So if you go to the next slide, right now, according to our scan, again, 19 states have statutes that require districts to provide professional development specific to early literacy. And again, these aren't super targeted things that Laura mentioned. I feel like in most cases they are, but it's not listed specifically within the statute. So things like using evidence-based research, how to use instructional materials, how to screen and diagnose students, how to use assessment to inform instruction. They kind of range broadly. And just scanning quickly, only 2 states, North Carolina and Ohio, specifically name the science of reading within their professional development statute. We wanted to just focus quickly, 1 click here for Arkansas. They do require reading specialists there provide training programs for the teachers and the principals, which was kind of a unique look as we were scanning this legislation. And if you're really thinking about the principal as the instructional leader, they're really trying to frame, literacy at the school level, and having someone drive that overall growth as well, and might provide a nice kind of high level perspective on improvement and areas for progress. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, coaching and mentoring is definitely an emerging area. And according to our scan back in September, there were only 4 states that kind of met the criteria for what we were looking for. But this really focuses on things like job embedded, classroom-based, intensive and comprehensive training and coaching in the teaching of reading. It also includes things like assistance in designing instruction and intervention. So it's a much more targeted approach than kind of one-off professional development that, at least in my experience, we got, every other month for an hour. So just a much more purposeful professional development lens. I just want to highlight South Carolina. There they have literacy coaches in each elementary school. And the state also has a reading proficiency plan where they must include PD to improve teacher reading expertise. And also, again, back to the notion of principal leadership, they have this mention of literacy leadership, which I thought was kind of a unique frame for this work. Next slide. So just back to dyslexia, and this is professional development. We found 20 states that had statute in this area. 2 states make it optional for teachers. Those are Georgia and North Carolina. Washington, D.C. will start implementing a requirement here in the 22-23 school year. So there's quite a bit happening in this space. Just wanted to highlight Texas too. We found a little bit of an innovative approach there. Law there requires the state education agency to annually develop a list of training opportunities regarding dyslexia, and these have to be in direct connection to an international organization that focuses on dyslexia research. So they annually kind of update this to make sure that those best practices are in place. Next slide. So just kind of looking quickly across the policy landscape in Delaware, and just to preface this too, ECS takes a very broad look across all the states, so we don't have kind of the insider on the ground knowledge that may be lacking from this slide too. So apologies for that ahead of time, but according to our scan, there was a coursework competency requirement, and it did mention the science of reading in Delaware, although I'm sure every state would love to have a chance to kind of revisit, revise. There's no requirement around passing an assessment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's no requirement around dyslexia for teacher prep that we could locate either. One more click. Regarding professional development, just researching this for this presentation, part of the SCA in Delaware is working on a statewide literacy plan. So part 3 and 4 kind of rose up for me, at least in this presentation. Part 3 looks at enhancing early literacy instruction. So really trying to make the early learning component of this front and center, thinking about what kind of pre-K supports kids are getting, all the pre-literacy and language skills that they need to be developing prior to kindergarten entry, because we know every kid gets different experiences. They enter kindergarten with vastly different skills, which will definitely impact, the K3, K2 space. Part 2 of the literacy plan also looks at supporting educators through institutes of higher ed. So there is part of that, if I'm correct, that is looking at pre-service and in-service literacy development education opportunities, which is kind of similar to that Tennessee legislation I mentioned earlier, but that bill may provide more or less examples of places where, you can kind of unpack that idea a little bit more. And next slide. Thank you, Anthony. If you click once, I just wanted to highlight the top. So this is just a list of some 2020, 2021 early learning resources that ECS has released over the past couple of years. But we did release a paper back in August that really gets at some of the components of K3 literacy systems. And I'd encourage you to take a look as soon as these slides are shared. I worked on this with a few of my colleagues and with some folks at CCSSO on this one. So hopefully that's of use as well. And that is all I had. My email address is at the bottom. Definitely happy to follow up. And thank you again for this great opportunity.
Thank you so much, Matt. Very interesting and important to know what other states are doing as we consider legislation in the very near future, hopefully, to address the teaching of reading. So that's really helpful. I'm going to introduce once again my colleague, Senator McBride, so that she can introduce our next speaker and our last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Sturgeon. Thank you so much, Matt, for that wonderful presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing Kelly Butler from the Barksdale Reading Institute. Kelly's experience as a teacher in nonprofits and with states looking to improve their reading policies make her a great fit as our next speaker, building off of the wonderful presentations we've already heard. Kelly will share with us the transformative impact seen in other states who have implemented the science and policies we've heard about so far and some of the lessons learned from those other states. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Kelly.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you, and thank you all for doing your homework on this really important subject, and to my colleagues who've given some really great information to you. I'm playing cleanup here at the last. There's a lot that aligns with what you've already heard today about what I'm going to tell you. I'm with the Barksdale Reading Institute. We are based in Mississippi, and we're founded with a $100 million commitment by Jim Barksdale, who was with Netscape and FedEx and Sun Microsystems and a number of high-tech organizations. He is a native of Mississippi and was committed to lifting us off the bottom. And I want to begin by saying, while it was nice to have $100 million to learn a lot of lessons, I don't think you necessarily need it in Delaware to do this. We have a lot of lessons you can learn from, and we're here to share some of those with you today. When I first met Jim Barksdale, he told me the story of his time at FedEx, and he is attributed with developing those little gizmos that you have to sign when you receive a package. And what that gizmo does is it makes sure that packages are delivered the same way all over the universe. And he said, if we can deliver a package from the middle of Manhattan to the middle of Tokyo and guarantee its safe arrival in 48 hours and track it along the way, we ought to be able to teach every child in Mississippi to read. And that's the mantra that I wake up with every morning, that we have tried a lot of things that haven't worked, but we have come upon, I think, a pretty good formula that other states are wise to learn from. I believe that teacher preparation, that the science of reading really needs to begin there. And we have talked a bit about that today, and in terms of the professional development that's going on around the country. What Mississippi has done is two things. We have introduced the professional development into their K-3 system through our Literacy-Based Promotion Act, but we're also taking it to higher education, because what we're finding is that the faculty themselves in teacher preparation, through their own training, did not receive the science of reading. Their programs, their advanced degree programs, did not include the science of reading, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So this flat line of NAEP, which has been going on for more than almost 3 decades now, and this bottom line, I can't see it on my screen because of the location of the photographs, but the top dotted line is the national flat line of NAEP, and the bottom line is Mississippi. And you see that over these many decades, we've been doing a lot of work, sometimes uneven, but to reach the national average in reading, 4th grade reading. Since 1998, states have been actively considering legislation, and you've heard a little bit about that today from Matt, and he has a good deep dive on what those individual states are doing. One of the things that happened in Mississippi, though, was the passage of the 3rd grade law, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And while we were all a little concerned about what this might mean for 3rd graders, it really shined a light on the problem, and it was a wake-up call, and it may not require statute or a 3rd grade law to do it in your state, but it was the wake-up call that made district leaders and state superintendents and others ask the question, do we really know how to teach reading? If our scores are so flat, maybe we're not getting this job done in time. And so the role that Mississippi and the State Department of Education played here was to get serious about training teachers in evidence-based practices. So this slide is what I call the suite of policies that have occurred across time in Mississippi that led to this Literacy-Based Promotion Act and ultimately the NAEP scores. You'll see on the left side of the slide, the Barksdale Reading Institute was established the same year that the National Reading Panel was formed. And we hit the ground running with these evidence-based practices to try to get them embedded in every level of the system. We've done 2 studies of teacher preparation in Mississippi. The first one was in 2003, where we had been investing in teacher preparation faculty to try to improve what was happening at that level. And what we determined was then early on that the faculty really knew very little about the science of reading. From there, we moved to the state school board and lobbied with them to introduce two 3-hour courses in early literacy instruction, because one of the things that that first study determined was that you could go to any of the public institutions. That was the study, that was the scope of the first study, and not learn what all 5 components of reading are, which Laura talked about earlier in her presentation. So the school board adopted this requirement, and we moved forward with helping faculty begin to do a better job of teaching the 5 components of reading. Minimally, it was a pretty low bar as I look back on it, but it was an important turning point for us in Mississippi. Fast forward to 2013, when we passed this Literacy-Based Promotion Act, we did a number of things with that particular law. The State Department looked to Barksdale, who had been working in the field, providing high quality professional development and coaching in as many as 180 schools at one time, and asked us for assistance in designing the rollout of the Promotion Act. And essentially what it did was take the Barksdale model to scale, that being high quality professional development and coaching. In 2014, we introduced the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, and this was the first time we actually had statewide data on what was happening with kindergartners as they entered school, which is an important predictor of how well they will do in reading based on what you know from those screeners. In 2015, we repeated the study, this time including all 15 teacher preparation programs, specifically looking at early literacy. We were interested in knowing whether or not those 2 courses that we had introduced back in 2005 were getting the job done, because now we were spending $15 million to retrain teachers, and I would argue in some places to train them in the first place on what the science of reading tells us about how we process language. In 2015, following that study, the governor established a task force. He was very serious about getting teacher preparation on board with the science of reading. And from that task force, we designed a professional growth model for faculty, which we call the Mississippi Momentum Project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes. In 2016, we introduced the Foundations of Reading, which is the assessment that we are using. We are hoping to strengthen that particular assessment. The state of Massachusetts is in the process of revising, and then I think in April it goes live. It's a much stronger test, and we're hoping that it's going to have even a greater impact on bringing teacher preparation into the accountability loop. That led us then to the 2019 NAEP, and I can't see it on my slide, but there's one more step of 2021 where we launched a multi-state initiative to do much of what we are doing in Mississippi to learn and benefit other states. So I have the same slide and quote from Stanislaus Dehaene that Laura shared with you, and I bring it up again. It's worth repeating because one of the things that we've learned in our work in teacher preparation and in the field in K-3 classrooms is there are a lot of dandelions blooming. There are a lot of ways teachers are teaching reading. There are a lot of curricula out there that provide different ways of teaching reading. And what Stanislaus Dehaene is telling us is that the brain really processes language in the same way, and that we need to get about the business of making our reading instruction much more standardized in the same way that Jim Barksdale made that gizmo that you have to sign when you get your FedEx package. So we've been shining a light on teacher preparation, and Mississippi, we've asked these key questions. Does the pre-service curriculum reflect a scientifically based approach to reading instruction? Are there opportunities in pre-service to connect knowledge to practice? And the big question and the elephant in the room often is, do the faculty themselves have this knowledge and content and pedagogy for teaching evidence-based practices? And I want to be fair that it is through no fault of their own, which was an earlier quote that Laura shared. It's because their own programs didn't include the science. But because we now know better, we need to do better, and we need to provide faculty with the opportunities to get up to speed as well. I think this is an important question as states consider the legislation and things that they may be considering for policy. in particular, because it's one thing to require different licensure. It's another also to require a reading assessment of those pre-service candidates. But if the faculty still don't know how to enact some of those changes, you're not a whole lot better off. So I would encourage you to shine this light. This is the deep dive Mississippi took in our two programs, one in 2003 and more recently in 2015. This shows you kind of a flow of how we go deeply into looking at what happens at pre-service levels. We've tried to do this in a very safe and confidential way so that it is not a ranking and it's not an exposure to embarrass anyone, but it's really to help teacher preparation programs be much more reflective themselves about what they are doing with a real emphasis on the content of the science of reading. So there were three key findings from this last study that we did, and they were very informative of what we have been doing since then. So we determined that the structure and content of early literacy courses were inconsistent across the state. We established that the research principles of early literacy were largely unapplied in preparation and practice. And we realized that there were not many opportunities to observe instruction of, at the entry level, where teachers were, pre-service candidates were not getting to see what good teaching looked like. These are some important lessons, I think, as you contemplate what you might do in Delaware, that there is a lot to be said for streamlining some of this, this content in our pre-service curriculum. So here is cohort 1 of the Mississippi Momentum. You'll see by these logos that it was a very collaborative process that we engaged in, including the governor's office and the Institutes for Higher Education. This is cohort 1. We've just gotten some new funding from Kellogg to repeat cohort and to repeat this work beginning with the second cohort in the fall. I've collapsed what we've done in this professional growth model to one slide, but I will share with you that it's really 4 key components. High quality professional development in the science of reading. We selected letters, one, because we had had a long track record at the Institute with letters, long before the state introduced it to their K-3, but we felt like it was important for everybody to be on the same page, and it was helpful for K-3 teachers and pre-service faculty and candidates to all have the same presentation of the science to accelerate change. We designed a community of practice where we brought these faculty together. There were about 40 to begin with, and focused on some key text to help them focus better on the pedagogy of the science of reading, not just what the content is, but how do you deliver it in an effective and an efficient way. The third component, which was really key, was we sent a national letters trainer, pictured here, out into the field to do modeling and coaching on site. Exactly what the K-3 teachers received, the faculty were now receiving from one of their peers. And then the fourth component is that we designed the curriculum, pre-service curriculum, organized around those 2 key models that you learned from Laura, the simple view of reading and the Scarborough-Rote model. All of the curriculum for early literacy should be built around those models. And we actually provided these faculty with giant posters so that it's ever present in their classrooms in pre-service teaching. We are gaining traction. So we have launched, all that began with that Mississippi work, something called the Path Forward. And I was glad to hear Senator McBride talk about a path forward. We feel like this is a really important step to finally bringing teacher preparation into the accountability loop for early literacy. It has 4 primary goals. One is to look at the curriculum that's happening right now and to get a snapshot of what teacher preparation programs are doing, to engaging multiple stakeholders for the first time to bring pre-service faculty and schools of ed at the same table with K-12 to talk about reading instruction and to begin to solve problems together, to knit together a coalition of others who can accelerate this change across states. We don't feel like you have to do this state by state, that there's a lot to be learned here that you could do, and I think are benefiting just from this call today to pick up on some of these lessons. And then to encourage philanthropy as a neutral broker. We found in Mississippi a public-private partnership has been have been pretty encouraging. So cohort 1 includes these 6 states. We have heard from more than 20 states and have interviewed state teams. We anticipate having a cohort 2 probably beginning in late fall, and we hope Delaware might express some interest in being on that list. Part of the work that these teams are doing are working with something we've developed here called the Levers for Change. And this is sort of a snapshot of all the possible ways you can impact early literacy, whether it's through state legislation or other kinds of policies. And then down the left-hand column, all of the components of a strong literacy model, that many of the things that we've done here in Mississippi, and some of the things that Matt referred to when he was giving you his landscape analysis. So that's the Mississippi story in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions or turn it back to you, Senator Sturgeon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Mississippi is really a model for us, and I'm excited that we can hopefully rely on some of what you've learned and what you have to teach here in Delaware. And I see that my colleague, Senator Bonini's hand is up, and I do want to quickly turn it over to the members of the Education Committee who are here to ask questions. And then if there's time, we can open it up to the public. So Senator Bonini, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to the speakers. This was, I unfortunately have to get off the call, but as my colleagues will tell you, I married way up. I am actually married to a neurobiologist who's actually explained the science of reading to me a few times. So I'm very excited about it. I apologize I have to get off the call. And Madam Chair, if you could please, keep me posted. Anything I can do to help push this forward. This is tremendously exciting. And thank you so much.
Senator Bonini, that's great to know. We have a partner in you to try to advance some policy in this area. Do any of the other senators from the Education Committee have questions or comments? Please raise your hand, or just, oh, there she is. Senator Lockman is is now present, so we can mark her present in the minutes. And just for those who don't know, she is the Senate co-chair of Education. Senator Lockman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize that I'm not on video, but I have been listening attentively, and I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to you and Representative Williams and Senator McBride for hosting this. And I wanted to thank the speakers for really compelling presentations that just leave me as excited and I think as hopeful as you all have obviously been. My question, I guess, would be, I think for any of the speakers, but perhaps particularly not BCS, and perhaps any of you who are working on the legislation. So what is most needed, I guess, in Delaware specifically to get us on the right track, like other states like Mississippi or others who are really finding success in this space? So like, which levers are we looking to pull? Thank you.
Senator Lockman, I have been working with a small group of stakeholders. And the 3 areas that we've been looking at for legislation, we have some draft legislation, but it's very early stages. But we've been looking at making sure that in Delaware, our higher eds that teach teachers, especially elementary teachers and special ed teachers in particular, making sure they are teaching correctly. And then we're looking at professional development for teachers who are already in the field to make sure they're, in case they didn't learn how to teach reading in the best possible way, they have the opportunity to learn now while they're already working. And finally, let's see, so we have the higher eds we're focused on ongoing professional development. Oh, and also, since we do recruit teachers to come teach in Delaware from other states, and we do not have the opportunity to tell other states higher eds how to teach teaching or how to teach reading, the pedagogy of reading. We are also looking at the possibility of an assessment that those teachers coming from other states could take to demonstrate that they know how to teach reading according to the science. So those are the three areas we've been considering, but I would love to have any of our experts share if you think that we're on the right track with that, or if there's something we're not thinking of, or, so please, experts, jump in.
Well, I would say you're smart to start with the landscape analysis, similar to what Tennessee is doing in terms of looking at what is happening on the ground with teacher prep. You don't need to fix something that's not broken, but you need to know what's going on if you do need to make changes. So I think that's always a good first step.
Yeah, I would just piggyback quickly and say, the teachers they account for somewhere around a quarter of student achievement. So really focusing on the teacher as a central driver of change is a good strategy as well.
Senator Lockman, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, well, and I was really intrigued by the mention of coaching and mentoring as an emerging field. I guess, is there data yet on whether or not that's an effective approach that we should be incorporating, or is it still too new?
Yes, there is. No, and that I think is the magic bullet here in Mississippi, is that we didn't just do, and that was part of the original Barksdale model, is that and the research around that is that when you get professional development just for content, you take about 15% of that and apply it to your classroom. But when you add a coaching component to that, the application goes up to 95%. So there's a lot of research that demonstrates coaching is the difference maker. And we've seen states who've only done the professional development without the coaching, and they've suffered for it. I know Matt was mentioning Alabama is one of those states. And in fact, if you look at the trajectory of NAEP for Alabama, they introduced coaching long before many of us were thinking about it. They unplugged it, and the subsequent years, their NAEP scores took a total nosedive. They are back introducing coaching for that reason.
That's excellent. Thank you so much.
Senator Lockman, great questions. And we're going to have to look at that coaching piece. Yeah. Thanks for reminding us that that's an important part of the puzzle.
Sure.
Senator Townsend's hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to be more present, I guess, officially. They've been attending.
Please mark him present, Anthony.
Just more, not so much a specific question, though, perhaps one, but wanted to thank everyone for being here to present fantastic presentations. Particularly appreciate Laura's Stewart's imagery, as Senator Sturgeon had noted. I've got almost a 4-year-old son that I read to every night, and like last night he squeezed 4 books out of me after he had already delayed bedtime by actually picking up his toys. So he's a negotiator, but seeing that, the imagery and literally the mathematical formula that you're talking about, certainly, keeping me mindful of how he's learning and what I can do, which is a whole different issue than the broader policy changes we're talking about and the broad swath of Delawareans we'd love to impact. But it really did hit home to an active, reader of a preschooler now. And so my question is, I guess, sort of more to Senator Sturgeon, although I'm sure she would certainly welcome the experts' input at this stage, is how this can and should fit. And I don't think we had talked about this. I apologize if I missed it, but how this can and should fit with the additional resources that are going to be teed up here as part of the education lawsuit settlement. Obviously, there's a host of things we want to try to do in schools, but to the extent we have reason to believe that we could be very have a much higher efficacy and ultimately efficiency in how we're delivering education services and enhancing reading ability. Kind of curious how that might merge with the ongoing discussions and legislation to enhance funding in the immediate moment.
That's a great question. Actually, I think there's the legislation that Representative Williams, who's with us on the call, is going to be running soon that will give much more, will add increased funds. Well, it'll give funds for the first time, I think, right, ever, for K through 3 special, basic spec ed. That's that K through 3 is key right there already. Some degree of phonemic awareness and language, exposure to language is starting to happen in those years. And I'm wondering if some of that funding can't, be funneled towards the kinds of things we're talking about. Representative Williams, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, and that's a great point, Senator Townsend. So yeah, so this will put more bodies into the classroom. It'll lower the class sizes. So this will be an important factor in, actually someone was texting me while all of you were presenting, talking about the K-3 bill, how this will help classrooms. So, and there's also language that that was put in by Senator Poore and I think Representative Longhurst in regards to dyslexia. $500,000 is in our in DOE to help students who are not reading on grade level. There's money there to help them as well. That will be there this year. So Delaware is really trying to get this right. And the present, I just want to, since I'm here, I just want to thank everyone for the presentations. They were excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Senator Lockman's hand is up again. Senator.
Sorry. No, I just
No,
thought
please.
that
We love
was
hearing
sparked
from
by-
you.
by Senator Townsend's question that I've been thinking about a lot in regards to the settlement. We know a really large component of what that does in terms of resources has to do with the opportunity funding, which we've in the Senate just crossed the first leg of codifying permanently. And we know that in the first round of distribution of those funds, so much of it was focused, so much of the requests that we got from districts who get to make the decision about how to spend those funds was focused on mental health supports and behavioral health services. And we know, of course, we have House Bill 100 coming, which could potentially do a lot to alleviate that pressure from that funding, perhaps, and potentially making more room for our districts to want to use those funds more towards such purposes. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. And your work on the Reading Consortium also did, some of your recommendations focused on the earliest learners, and this ties right in, right?
Right, and whole professional development as well.
Very good. Other questions from committee members before we open it up to the public? Well, let me first, because we are 12 minutes past the hour. Let me ask, are our guest speakers, our panelists, able to stay for 5 or 10 more minutes, or do we need to wrap up? Yes. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and extend the length of the meeting by about 10 minutes, and so that I can open the floor to questions from the public. I think we had nearly 100 people sign up to participate in today's hearing, so we really would love to hear from a few of them. Anthony, could you let us know if anyone in the public has raised their hand, or we remind them how they would indicate they want to ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go ahead and use the raise hand feature if you're one of the attendees in the seminar currently. We actually have a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time. And so I thought it might be the most prudent thing to do to get ahead and raise those first, if that's all right with you, Madam Chair.
Yes. And if you could hold off for 1 second, because I realized I made an error. We had also invited the members of the House Education Committee. Not I'm sure some may have come, not all could come, and we have Senator McBride, and she's technically not on the Education Committee, and I didn't really give an opening. So before we move to the public, I'd like to give an opening to members of the House Education Committee, or basically any legislators, Senator McBride or others who may be on the call who aren't technically on the Senate Education Committee. Do any of you have questions? If so, raise your hand, and that way Anthony can call on you first before we go to the general public. And Anthony, I cannot see everybody, so if you could let me know if any legislators have raised their hands.
Sure, I do not see anybody at the moment.
Okay, very good. Then in that case, please go ahead and open it to the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so just as a general, we will try to keep these brief as we, we're a little bit over time here, but the questions that were submitted in advance, the first one that I have is from Susan Shirk. and it's the following. I chair the board of St. Michael's School and Nursery in Wilmington, where we launched with Nemours, an early reading readiness program, and we participate in the Dolly Parton Books program. It does seem that the greatest return on investment in education lies with the early education and care programs, including reading readiness. I hope the Delaware General Assembly will assure adequate support for early childhood programs that prepare our youngsters for the work of kindergarten and beyond. Reading readiness begins at birth. Can this panel comment on the work necessary before kindergarten? Thank you, Susan Shirk.
Yeah, why don't, whichever panelist feels most equipped to answer that. Kelly, you've taken yourself off mute. Would you like to take that one?
Well, Jim Barksdale once said if he had another 100 million, he would give it to early childhood, because everything we do in early childhood impacts everything beyond that. And it's so right there. Your question coming in is really apropos. We're developing a campaign around oral language so that caregivers, all adult caregivers, have an awareness that reading, talking to, and with your child not only develops their brain, it prepares their brain for learning to read. So if you remember that simple view of reading and the language side, if you don't have enough language, it's going to be harder to teach you to read. So I would echo the importance of quality early childhood. It was part of the suite of policies that we enacted. We now have an early learning collaborative to get universal pre-K, moving towards universal pre-K here in Mississippi. And the kindergarten readiness assessment that we used also is used at the end of pre-K to gauge what's happening with our pre-K programs.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, and we would love to see universal pre-K in Delaware as well. And that's something hopefully one day we'll get to. And Susan, who sent in the question, is a constituent of mine and a huge proponent of early childhood education. So it's good to hear from her. And I agree. And yeah, there's two components. There's the phonemic awareness, right? The decoding, but the other component is knowing what the words mean once you've decoded them. And we prepare kids to know what words mean way before they're reading. We start preparing them by speaking to them and giving them lots of opportunities to hear language and hear, a lot of language. And those of us like myself who are blessed to have grown up in a bilingual home, that really prepped me to learn to read because I was hearing so much language. And that's we can start from the time they're born, speaking to them and exposing them to language. Anthony, next comment you got sent in advance.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. The next question is from Ida Wasserstein, and her question is this. What is being done to filter this good research down to the pre-K and daycare level and support the providers of those services for younger children? Pre-K and daycare need more funding.
Well, we agree that pre-K and kindergarten need more funding. Ida Wasserstein actually is a children's book author and former attorney and judge here in Delaware, and another great figure to hear from. And we agree. I mean, it's related to the first question. We have to start early. We have to start young, and there's different policies in play to do that. Does anybody want to get more specific? Senator Scola, you're off mute. Did you have something you want to add?
Yep.
Okay.
There is an early learning letters professional development for that goes all the way down. So it's a pretty seamless set of modules that would recommend for early childhood providers. And there are other.
Good to know. Good to know. So that letters PD program you shared has an earlier component.
Correct.
Great. Thank you. Anthony, do we have any more sent in questions?
We do not, and I don't currently see any hands raised out of all the participants. So just a reminder to any participants here, if you'd like to go ahead and use the raise hand function. I see Michael Pillsbury. Michael, we're going to go ahead and let you talk here.
Hi, I'm one of those kids that needed intensive intervention growing up. Like I needed one-on-one help to learn how to read in first grade and maybe second grade too. And I still read really slow, and I know reading is really important. So thank you all very much for what you're doing. And hopefully we can get the public to support you on whatever we can do to help these kids read better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. Anthony, is there anybody else?
Yes, we have Rachel Karchmer-Klein. Rachel, I'm putting you in now.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. I am an associate professor of literacy ed at University of Delaware. So I was curious about how you assess higher ed faculty's knowledge of the science of reading, and how you went about that with the program in Mississippi, and how you would suggest a state like Delaware would do that.
Kelly?
Well, first we started by looking at the curriculum to see how faculty had designed a curriculum. And that's a good beginning point because it tells you a little bit about the knowledge base and expectations of early literacy instruction. But there are also a number of teacher knowledge surveys that have been administered that have been quite helpful in actually assessing what kind of knowledge faculty members have. We did it through interviews, talking with faculty, observing their instruction, looking at the kinds of assessments they give to their pre-service candidates. So it's sort of a really deep dive into the whole program. And at the center of that is how much faculty themselves are prepared to deliver that instruction and what the content is about. I would say that I think it's really important for this to be done in a safe and confidential environment. I think that pre-service faculty have been criticized a lot, and I think that that's why it's important to figure out what's going on before you try to go in and start fixing things. So I appreciate your question, and I think that folks like yourself who are engaged in this work can be really helpful in bringing colleagues along to think about this important change.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I think we should take 2 more questions and stop, so that we're not imposing too much on our speakers.
Absolutely. So we actually only have one more person who's raised their hand. That is James Spadola. So I'll go ahead and let him in.
Great. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, representatives and senators and panelists for doing this. I'm the executive director for Read Aloud Delaware. And since the pandemic, we've incorporated a virtual program called Lena Start, which incorporates wearable technology designed to track and improve the language environment in the home. We're holding an info session for families tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We do them every Tuesday. But my question for the panelists, if they have any experience with Lena Start, they're out of Colorado. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that and any other programs designed to improve the language environment in the home that you might know of. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, James. Good to see you. And Kelly is off mute again, so I have a feeling she would like to answer.
Well, bravo for bringing Lena to Delaware. It's a great program. We have not used it in Mississippi. We have not had the funds to implement it, but we have modeled our Talk from the Start campaign around some of what Lena is based on. Lena was developed by the same folks who developed Accelerated Reader, and what their goal is to actually track the language development in those early grades. So it's a great program, and I applaud you for doing it.
That's so good to hear. I'm sure that was great for James to hear. Thank you. All right. Well, I know we could go on all day, but you all have other things you must do, and so do we. But I just want to thank you for your time. You were so generous with your time. You stayed late, past the hour, and it's just really important to, it just means so much to us as legislators who want to help, the children in our state. And we're just extremely grateful. And we hope that we can continue to reach out to you in the future to partner, to move forward, and to hopefully advance the policies that we know will work. And with that, I would like to thank the public who logged on today to listen, and encourage them to share today's presentation once we have it up online. And I'm just trying, I've lost track of my notes. Yeah, we can, at this point, I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.